I gotta tell everyone after I left and retired.
You can?
Yeah, I get to see you again twice in 1 week.
Yeah, I get to see you tomorrow, right? I get to see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody rescheduled, so I'm gonna reschedule it.
Oh, you
Yeah.
rescheduled?
No, I'm going to, was scheduled for the 30th, so it's on Monday, but I have to reschedule it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but she had another meeting. I'm actually met with did like a screening.
Yes, I imagine you would be.
Yeah, she emailed me October 30th, actually, and I agreed to that, and I have to change it. I'll do that
That's fine.
tomorrow, so, okay. It's so funny.
Hi. Yeah, with the set.
You want me to use this?
Yeah, you can put it on to you if you want to.
I'll clip it on. Should I turn it on? It's already on because it. Oh, you're right. I'll turn it on.
Yeah, I told her about.
How are you doing, Matt?
Doing well,
I'm looking forward to your. I'm looking forward to coming to your announcement.
I am excited about it. I'm very honored that the constituent will be there as well. Constituent and
I'm
state.
more than a constituent. I'm a fan.
They're amazing. Right back at you. I'm really excited to where this task force is going.
Yes, absolutely.
You want me to start?
Maybe just give it another minute.
Okay. You know who you are, but I want to.
Yep. You
Kind of like-
came late.
Yeah, we
Thank you.
precluded everyone from.
Okay, we did the
Yeah, we do the same thing. Don't feel bad.
You're not the only one. They really need to be on both.
Ready? Thank you all for coming. I want to express my gratitude. Everyone has been so enthusiastic. We've had 3 working groups with 2 meetings each, and they've been well attended, and people have been enthusiastic, and you guys have been very giving of your time. I know all of you have busy schedules, and we're just very appreciative of that. And I'd like to welcome some new task force members. Laura Urado. And you want to say a word about yourself, Laura?
Oh, thanks. I'm a board member at large with the School Culture Association of Arizona. Thank you.
And Paul Teig. We all know Paul from the ASA.
Executive Director, Arizona School District.
And Stacy Anderson and Jennifer Ostrom, both from the Arizona Association of School Psychologists. Would you identify yourselves? So welcome to all of you that are new, and we appreciate your participation very much. All groups have been dealing with both short-term and long-term developments and what we hope to accomplish. One example of a short-term problem was that we had awarded, I think, about 350 school resource officers that we funded, but a lot of schools had a problem finding a police officer who could fulfill something that had already been funded. And Michael came up with a very creative solution, and we ran it by the relevant committee before I announced it publicly. But the solution was to use a company, ODM,
ODM, yes.
ODM, which specializes in placing police officers in work that's when they're not on duty. So like private companies that need security for construction or churches, different groups. And so they're placing police officers on their off duty. So it may be one day a week that they're off duty, that they can serve as a police officer in a school. And so you need 5 of those per week so that you had full coverage. We're not participating in anything that doesn't have full coverage because you don't want a maniac invading a school and there's nobody there. But this is working out very well. We're filling up those positions. And so we solved a very important short-term problem with the help of Mike coming up with, I think, a very creative solution. And if we ever encounter a situation where social workers or psychologists positions are hard to fill, we can use the same solution there. We're going to discuss current challenges, review proposed initiatives, and explore collaborative approaches to enhance school safety messages. And at our first meeting, we went around and everyone spoke. I don't think that's necessary this time. Anything that is said and anybody has a comment can raise their hand and participate, but we're not going to require people to speak by going around the way we did in the first meeting. And then as we encounter the problems, the working groups are the ones that will solve them. So I'll now turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Superintendent, and good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, Mike Kurtenbach. I think I've met with virtually everybody in person or virtually, I guess. And I want to thank you all, not only for coming to the first meeting that we had, but for those of you that have also agreed to come to our working group meetings where there's been a lot of work accomplished. Rather than work off of a PowerPoint, hopefully everybody picked up a hard copy of the PowerPoint. If you didn't, they're up here. We can pass them out so that everybody has that information. For the working groups, my intent is to just give an overview of what the working groups were working on. And please, those of you that participated in those meetings, jump in, add additional context, let everybody know, what we have worked on and what we are striving to. But the goal here today is to take the outcomes from the working group meetings and the proposals, bring them back here to the full body, and then for you to ultimately provide us some direction. Hopefully we're moving down the right path, or if there's more work that needs to be done, just to take that direction from you. So first off, and I'm jumping so you can see they're not numbered, just this slide right here, the initial task force objectives. So there really were 4 areas that we were looking at, and that was review expanding the definition of an SRO. I'm going to go into greater detail about what the superintendent talked about earlier, and it specifically relates to the language in ARS 15154. As everybody around the table knows, 15154 governs the school safety program. It is very clear about who can be funded under the program: an SRO, a juvenile probation officer, a school counselor, or a school social worker. And talking about that language, does it make sense? What we heard from the working groups, and I'll get into that in greater detail as we go slide by slide, is that perhaps there's an opportunity, Representative Pollock, as you brought up, to expand that to include school psychologists. And I trust that Stacy and Jennifer will talk about that when we get to that part as well. But even around the idea of a school resource officer, the language in 154 says a peace officer or a full authority reserve officer as certified by the Arizona Peace Officer and Standards Training Board. And this is where Matt's expertise as the executive director of POST is critical to us. Does that make sense? Should it be expanded? Could it be expanded if there was a legislative desire to do so, to include, let's say, retirees? As I've had the opportunity to go around the state, talk to people like me who are law enforcement retirees, recently retired, there appears to be an appetite and a desire to work in schools, but you have to have 2 things. You have to have that certification and you have to have a sponsoring agency. So whereas I'm still certified as a peace officer in the state, I don't have that sponsoring agency. So that's some of the discussion that we've had around that, and I think would be good for further discussion here as a task force. And then within the language that is codified in the SRO and JPO manual, we talk a lot about the school safety assessment and prevention team and the roles that those play. And it isn't clear about how school counselors and school social workers play a role in that team. It's not clearly defined. So I mentioned in the very first meeting, I know that a perfect world doesn't exist, but if we could imagine for just a moment that in a perfect world that there be a menu for our schools to draw from: SRO, JPO, school counselor, school social worker, school psychologist, perhaps all, so we meet those needs. That requires a lot of money, which is why we talked about this, particularly in the funding work group, to talk about how we could potentially get there. And then the SSO model that the superintendent talked about, school safety officer, that I know we throw out a lot of acronyms, and I'll further define that as we get into the meat of this presentation. Some of you heard me say this before. As a nearly 33-year member of the Phoenix Police Department, I thought law enforcement had a lot of acronyms until I started working in education. And I've learned, wow, it's nothing compared to education. So the next slide is the ADE school safety update. Just to add a little bit more information on what the superintendent said. Last Wednesday, the superintendent announced a partnership with a company called Off Duty Management. Whereas we have 138 schools in the state of Arizona who applied for and were awarded a grant for a school resource officer who have not been able to fill that desire, to fill that officer. This is an issue with law enforcement staffing shortages across the state. It isn't unique to Phoenix, it isn't unique to Arizona, it's all over the country. But then providing those schools the opportunity to repurpose SSP dollars for an SRO into this school safety officer model. So it is, as the superintendent said, it's a sworn peace officer, full authority officer who is working in an off-duty capacity in the schools. Now, when my children were young, I worked a lot of off-duty. Officers work off-duty on a regular basis. You might see them out there directing traffic. You might see them in movie theaters this time of year as we all come out of our summer hibernation. You see them at festivals, events, sporting events, and whatnot. That's normal. That is an off-duty or an extra-duty job above and beyond their 40 hours. In this way, it isn't taking away, making sheriffs and police chiefs make very hard decisions about where they put their limited resources. It allows the officers to work in schools in their off time. Ideally, what I would like to see as a Phoenix resident whose children went to school here in the city of Phoenix, I would love to see a Phoenix officer working off duty in a Phoenix school, preferably in the precinct in which they work during their duty hours. So as somebody who spent 7 years working at night, 9 at night to 7 in the morning, you get a different perspective when you have the opportunity to see who you are entrusted to serve when you work there during the day, especially in a school. That is the idea. What this model does, though, because remember I talked about shortages in law enforcement already, what this model does is because officers have a statewide authority, is that Phoenix isn't required to cover all Phoenix jobs. No agency is. So because of that authority, you could have officers from other jurisdictions come into Phoenix and cover those schools. And also, I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, but just because you work for an agency, and I'm not going to put Steve on the spot, but just because he works for Chandler doesn't mean he necessarily lives in Chandler. Most of the time that I worked for the Phoenix Police Department, I lived south of the mountain in Ahwatukee. I was actually closer to Chandler, Tempe, but I'm a Phoenix officer. I say that because there are officers from other agencies that may live in a neighborhood where a school is, it would afford them the opportunity to work in those schools as well. So what we did was, again, they could opt in. We afforded the 138 schools that didn't have an SRO the opportunity to affirmatively say that they would like an SSO. And now we are placing those officers in those schools on the schedules that they asked for. So it's not telling them what to do. It's here's an SSO in your school during the time that you asked for it. And rather than just be an off-duty job, and I'm in no way maligning law enforcement, that would be silly since I did that for so long, it's providing a minimum of 8 hours of foundational training provided by the Arizona Department of Education to ensure that perhaps those things that a third shift officer sees, it's going to be a little different in a school environment, to educate him or her about what it's like to operate in a school environment. That's important for everybody to understand as a distinction. Next slide is entitled School Safety Update. And so what this discusses here is the exact numbers. Those of you that know me know that I'm a numbers guy. So under the School Safety Program grant, there were 850 schools that were awarded, 301 SROs, 566 school counselor or school social workers, and 2 JPOs. Of those, as you already heard me say, 138 SRO positions are unfilled. Well, 148 school counselor and school social worker positions are unfilled as well. And this is where Tina, in some of our working group meetings, provided some very important context as well. What's happening in law enforcement isn't unique to these other professions. It's happening in other professions as well. So as the superintendent said, this ODM model, if we see that there's benefit and perhaps there's opportunity to fill schools on maybe a part-time capacity, if it can't be a full-time, we could adapt to the model to do that with counselors and social workers as well. The next section talks about school safety partnerships. I'm always looking for technology and how to leverage technology. There's a unique collaborative here between ASU and Cox Communication that I am working with to leverage some existing technology, some with startups, some with existing companies, to find ways to enhance safety in schools. Many of you have seen, maybe you have them in your schools, there are some app-based solutions where you can push a button on an app with different providers. You can geofence the area around your school. You can provide certain permissions. And if there was an injury, if there was a critical incident, there's immediate notification to 911 and immediate notification to all of those that you've given permissions to within that geofenced area. That is one solution. Another solution is working with the public safety answering point communications to overlay some technology so that if there is an incident that's happening off campus that perhaps could come onto campus, that those that are given permission and access into these different programs would be notified. Think of an armed robbery that happens off campus, maybe with an outstanding suspect. In the neighborhood where I live, there was a subject with a gun last night that we started seeing it on Nextdoor that was coming up. You think that application during the day where you can notify the schools that they can make an informed decision potentially about a lockdown. And that way it's not incumbent upon law enforcement who may be handling a very dynamic situation to notify every school. And then there's AI technology that's out there that I've looked at. Some of you may have seen. If we talk about the worst case scenario, as a superintendent does frequently, a subject who means to inflict harm, a mass casualty event, that can identify weapons before somebody actually sees the weapon. Whether it be a long gun, whether it be a handgun, there are algorithms that have been built into some of this technology that can see that. So somebody doesn't have to actually be looking at a camera, identify it. There's verification once a notification is made. But these are different technologies that I've been looking at in addition to, and I don't think I mentioned this to the whole group in our first meeting, we had the opportunity to provide active shooter intervention training to 7 West Valley agencies, enhanced training for school resource officers. Superintendent Croto was gracious enough to open up one of his schools to allow us to do the training firsthand. We started out at the Glendale Regional Public Safety Training Center. And then if you think about it, you want to practice how you play. We were able to then use a school, actual classroom, using simunition, using folks that agreed to participate so our officers could get as close to real world training as possible. And then you think about integrating all this technology. And here's what I mean by that. If we had an incident, as a superintendent talks about, where you had somebody enter a school and start inflicting harm on staff, on students inside of that school, you're going to have an officer, if his school resource officer is on campus, go direct to that threat. That's the terminology, go direct to threat. Imagine if you had integration where a dispatcher now is able to see the cameras because permission has been given for the agency under that limited circumstance to see the cameras, to direct officers who are responding, and maybe an officer is on campus, to where that threat is, as opposed to saying something that might not mean anything to somebody. The perpetrator is wearing this clothing, is in building D, classroom 301. As a responding officer, I don't know what that means. It might mean something to an SRO, but not all schools have SROs, as we know. That's where Enhanced 911 comes into play as well. Enhanced or Next Gen 911 has been implemented wholly or partially in 7 states. It has been implemented partially in parts of Arizona, not in Maricopa County. Why does this matter? Enhanced 911 enhances situational awareness for first responders. It includes digital mapping of schools. I'm focusing on schools right now. It could be hospitals, it could be any other business. Because anytime an officer is responding to a critical incident, any first responders then, once the scene is safe to render aid, situational awareness is critically important. So this is where the superintendent allows me to work with these different partners to perhaps bring that technology, and why I reach out to some of you, some of the schools, some of the representatives of the various organizations, to see if we can pilot this technology so we can vet its efficacy and see if it makes sense to implement it on a broader scale. Next slide is just talking about the 3 task force working groups: funding and grants, operations and staffing, and then our training working group. Thank you to all of you who have taken time out of your schedules to staff these groups. We're recognizing how busy all of you are sending representatives to these groups. I think, can't speak for anybody who sits on these working groups, but I think everybody would agree there's been a lot of robust dialogue, which has helped to inform me And now we're going to get a little bit into that now. Just ask, are there any questions about anything I've touched upon as of yet? Okay. On the training, school counselor, school social worker working group, there's been a lot of discussion about increasing awareness. I talked about situational awareness before for officers, but there's been a lot of confusion about FERPA. And Steve, I'm going to put you on the spot here for just a minute. You're a practitioner. I've heard you teach. You do a great job. Would you say that most officers, it's a generalization, have an understanding of FERPA, how it applies as they're responding on the schools, and is there value in increasing that awareness?
No, not familiar with it. It's not something that is emphasized unless you have an initiative within your department to provide that extra training regarding FERPA, protected information at the school level.
That's one of the things we've talked about, because here's a practitioner who does know, but when we talk about officers that are responding to schools, making sure that they understand and making sure the school understands as well what information can be shared, whether it be in the furtherance of a criminal investigation or whatever the case may be. So it's really drilling down on that to enhance that awareness. The next part talks about the development of the manual. So several of you have heard me talk about, you've seen the manual. It's a 50+ page manual that is guidance provided by ADE for our school resource officers and our juvenile probation officers. It talks about the purpose of the program, the school safety assessment and prevention teams, who's on those teams, the forms that they're required to fill out. Steve, I think you would say it's a rather robust document.
Yep.
We worked with Steve to refine the document to make sure that it made sense. But then I started asking the question of, okay, we have this guiding document for SROs, but there isn't one for school counselors and social workers. This isn't to get in the weeds about what school counselors and social workers do. This isn't about knowing what protected information is out there, but it's making sure that as stewards of the tax dollar, there's the appropriate guidance. There's a framework for how they operate within the school safety program. So my team is already working on that, something that will be vetted with the task force and the task force working groups to see if we're hitting those categories that we need to hit. And Laura and Tina, I'll be relying on you for your expertise to make sure that we're going down the right path. Continuing this, there's been discussion about Jake's Law and making sure that these access monies are being properly utilized and directed in the manner in which my understanding they were intended to, and helping those uninsured or underinsured children that could otherwise be served by this. Is there a member of this group that maybe wanted to talk a little bit more about that and what the intent around this recommendation was from the training group? I want to make sure I was properly representing them, not putting anybody on the spot. And then the next part talks about the selection of school safety programs, things that we offer already that, and I'm talking about ADE, emergency operations plans, continuity of operations plans, Project Aware. You see comprehensive school safety threat and assessment guide. Those opportunities that exist, things that are actually burned into 15154, but making sure that all of the schools that are in the school safety program and beyond actually take advantage of these. It's all about drilling. You do this with fire drills, you do this with other drills in your schools, making sure that there's preparation, making sure that there are documents in place so that first responders aren't trying to learn on the fly. So it's really making sure that all of our schools have these plans and that they have them in a way that's easily accessible, not paper copies anymore, so that they're digitized for our first responders. Funding and grants. When we talk about school resource officers have a sponsoring agency. So the SRO is a job, a very important job within the agency. If school resource officer funding goes away from a school that they're assigned to, they're going to go back to working for their home agency in some other capacity. That safety net doesn't necessarily exist for our counselors and our social workers. That same safety net exists for the JPOs. excuse me. So we've had discussion about, is the funding cycle itself an inherent problem? The fact is, you get into a 3-year funding cycle, if somebody were thinking about working in a school as a counselor or a social worker, or maybe if this expands to a school psychologist in year 3, do they take that job when there's no guarantee that that job will exist beyond that year? So perhaps there's opportunity to rework the legislation and language around that to provide some guarantees, or if not guarantees, because there are no guarantees in ongoing legislation, to put some other maybe guidelines, some bumpers in place so that someone who is inclined to take one of these very important jobs feels that they have some safety and security in doing so. Also, the school safety program grant is very clear that it's about positions. And I talked at length earlier about technology, and then there's target hardening as well, whether it be door locks, maybe it's ballistic film, whatever the case may be. Right now, SSP doesn't allow for that. So might there be an appetite to change 154 to allow in some very strict governed language to include physical security for the schools, in addition to technology? And it just continues as we talk about the Prop 301, just making sure that we are utilizing the dollars in the most effective and efficient ways possible, and we're directing them in a manner that meets the needs at our schools. And lastly, the operations and staffing working group. You've heard I and the superintendent talk about us trying to get creative to meet the requests of the schools that have asked for SROs. And I've been very clear, and this is where Officer Dew has really educated me. And going back to my previous job as somebody who supervised school resource officers, I never was one. I supervised school resource officers, though. They have such an important job. The training that they go through, I sat through last week, where I watched Steve instruct. So in an off-duty model, I can't require that an officer leave his or her home agency for 3.5, 4 days of training. That's why we're requiring 1 day of training that can be delivered in an asynchronous manner. So that he or she, if they work third shift, if they work another time, they can go through the training. We have benchmarks in place to ensure that they're completing the training, so they at least have knowledge when they work in a school about those things maybe not to do and those things that they should do in terms of mandatory reporting. We had a lot of talk about the second column here, which is, and I alluded to it earlier, modifying 15-154 to perhaps include retirees. When it comes to the SRO side, there was some discussion, and some very spirited discussion, about should it expand beyond that? Should it expand to perhaps federal officers? Should it be expanded to include military veterans who come out of service? And Nat, would you just take a second just to touch upon maybe some of your concerns as it relates to that?
You always make me the bad guy.
No, I'm not making you the bad guy. I said concerns.
No, just some of the concerns I have is the way the Arizona Administrative Code is written is there's really there's two technically. There's still a specialty officer, but that's kind of been phased out. Phoenix Fire is one of the only places that still uses what they call specialty officers. And they went through a modified academy that Phoenix ran back in about 2009, 2010, and we haven't run one since. So we're kind of phasing that out. We did away with limited authority about 2 years ago, and those were the folks that went to community colleges. They were non-sponsored. Halfway through that program, they would get limited authority, and they could work with a full authority peace officer and have some level of authority out on the street. We did away with that too, because again, none of the community college students were using it. It just didn't make any sense to maintain it any longer. So it leaves us with full authority peace officers. The current curriculum is 663 hours through the academy, plus most agencies do a 12 to 18 week field training program. But even more importantly, in the administrative code, there's minimum qualifications. It's full background, a polygraph, drug screen, drug history, a full, very thorough background. And my concern is when we first started having this discussion is, with your military and your retirees, if we're not classing them or trying to get them classified as full authority peace officers, that's really out of my purview. So whatever the group decides to do, I would support that. My concern is there was talk about creating an additional certification level. And my question to that is, I was an SRO. I was an SRO sergeant. As a commander, I had 86 SROs that worked for me, so I'm very familiar with the program. Not quite as familiar as you, but pretty familiar.
Mhm.
And I will tell you that SROs get involved in everything. I can't think of anything that a street level police officer gets involved in. An SRO doesn't have the ability to get involved with on almost a daily basis. So my challenge to everyone here is if we wanted to go down that route, I'll let you go through the curriculum and you tell me which one of the 663 hours you want us to remove. I'm not comfortable removing any of them, just not. And then if you want to go even one step further, as Mike alluded to, every agency in the state is having a hard time recruiting men and women who want to be peace officers. So now there is a market out there, to Mike's point, because I've talked to people as well who are in that twilight of their career or whatever, for whatever reason they might be, that they didn't want to be an SRO throughout their entire career. But now, you know what? Maybe I don't want to work nights. Maybe I don't want to work weekends. Maybe that's a good transition. But having people come back, they still have to be fully certified. And then on top of that, if we try to create that lower level, again, talking about what hours you want us to take out of the training, but also what minimum qualifications do you want us to eliminate? Because most 20-year-old to 21 to 25-year-old young men and women, when we police officers, don't want to work in a school. And it's a really good job, it really is. When you get more time on, you realize, oh, that's a good gig, I want to go work there. But your young men and women, that's not what they're thinking. They're looking at the TV and they're watching movies and they want to be out on the street. And so I don't think you're going to have that. But again, the whole argument for me, and I don't think it's a good look for us, if we created additional classification of peace officer, is we're putting on a less qualified, a less trained person with a gun in a uniform on your child's campus. Do we want to do that? Do we want to be behind that legislation? I would argue no. I do work for the board, and if the board decides they ultimately want to go that, if the legislature decides they want to create additional state law that changes our administrative code and our rules, obviously we will support that and make it successful. I just think there's some behind the scenes things that would be very difficult for us to overcome in the public opinion. And that's just my 2 cents.
Matt, how about retired police officers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I brought this up after the last meeting. I go to all the regional meetings all over the state. And I brought up, we had a regional meeting with East Valley and West Valley police chiefs, and we discussed it at length. And their concern is, and your chief was one of them, is retirees are great. They want to come back. The problem is they want to be paid. And you want to go back to the same agency because you already understand the culture, you understand the radio system, the computer system, you understand how to write a report for that agency. Unfortunately, PSPRS doesn't allow you to come back to your home agency at the same position. You come back as a chief, but you couldn't come back as another officer in SRO. So that's the problem they're running into. Is like Sean Duggan will tell you, he goes, yeah, I'd love to hire retirees, but if I hire a retiree from Mesa, I can get them through the lateral process and get them certified, but then I got to put them through a 12-week FTO program just to learn the Chandler way of doing business. So, I mean, and I think it was Joe Kluwer that threw it out at our little subcommittee meeting, was that, hey, if we just made a change to PSPRS that allowed people to come back and work for their same home agency at a different, as strictly as an SRO, that might be a win where you get people. Because there are people that will come back, that want to come back and work again, not to work nights and weekends. And it's a good job to work on a school campus. Plus, it's rewarding to work with young men and women and interact with them in almost 90% of the time it's a positive fashion. So it's really rewarding for people who've been doing this career a long time. But again, that barrier of PSPRS does block that from you going back to your home agency.
And now teachers can come back.
That's ASRS, so it's a different system. Like when I retired from Phoenix PD and went to go work for Paul Penzone, Friday to Monday, I went into ASRS. So I was there, and that was a different agency.
So
But I could not have gone back on Monday to Phoenix unless I was the chief. And who
But it
wants
sounds
that
like
job?
something we should all get behind to change that, right? So that police officers can come back.
I think that's a really good first place to start. I can tell you from the East Valley and West Valley chiefs meeting, I don't want to speak for them, but I can tell you collectively, that seemed like that was a solution they were looking to explore as well.
And additionally, if I could add, I hear that in Phoenix from our officers that, that are nearing retirement, and we have a lot of them that, there are some of them would love to be able to go into a school and who maybe have high school kids and work while their kids are still there. And it would be a huge, huge win
So that's something it sounds
for
like
the state.
should be a high priority we could all get behind, really.
I would think so. I mean, historically, there's some high profile incidents that generated that rule change of PSPRS. But I think those days are over.
So that wouldn't be a legislative change, that would be a rule change?
No, that'd be a legislative change.
Legislative change?
Yeah.
You'd think the legislature would want things to be consistent between those two retirement organizations.
Like I said, there were some, I don't want to go into details, there were some high profile incidents from about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, where people came back to their same agencies and it was frowned upon by the community. I think you're talking about a totally different set of facts.
But you could articulate exactly the assignment that the exception is being made for.
Correct.
Like, you have smart schools where people come back and work for their own district all over again after retiring the day previously.
Right.
So if you wrote in that it was for school safety or school resource officer, it would alleviate any
Maybe some of those.
optically not comfortable
Any bad
double
perceptions,
dipping kind of.
It'd be a great change, sounds like.
Would they be then belted back up to the PSPRS or they move it over to the state system?
They would not be eligible for
For any of it.
PSPRS. The problem, well, not the problem, but they would be technically eligible for ASRS and agencies that contribute, but Phoenix doesn't, because Phoenix has their own internal system for non-sworn called coppers. So Phoenix couldn't do that. But again, there's most of the people you talk to aren't looking for a second retirement. They're looking for a second stream of income. And like you said, ma'am, something to do while they still want to work. They still have the ability to work. And again, it's not, I keep harping on this, but it's not nights and weekends.
Yes.
And that's what most people say. I'm just done working nights and weekends, missing family events. But if I can work while my spouse or my kids are in school, it's a win.
We finally fully funded our obligation in PSPRS.
Thank you.
And I don't want to upset that balance. That's my only concern with that. So if
No,
we're not, then we're good.
The other issue is the alternate rate contribution for PSPRS. If you occupy a position that should be filled, and hopefully I don't speak incorrectly, the numbers guy here should be able to keep me in line, but if you fill a position, and I'll use me as an example, when I went to work for the sheriff's office, since my position should have been filled by someone in PSPRS, and myself as well as the county should have been paying into PSPRS, they had to pay PSPRS a very small, they call it an alternate contribution rate, since I was taking up someone else's position, in addition to paying my ASRS. But yeah, so it shouldn't have a negative impact on PSPRS. But again, that's probably more in your.
Could I ask one clarifying question? So are you saying that someone working for the city of Chandler in Chandler's PSPRS group retires, cannot come back to work for Chandler if they wanted to be an SRO?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Currently, under the current, so now they can come back as a civilian employee. Like I said, they can come back as a chief, but you can't come back, if you leave as an officer, you can't come back as an officer. It gets a little fuzzy when you talk about coming back as a sergeant or someone else, but
But suppose this retiree comes back, we make this law change, you don't have a preference either way, whether they rejoin PSPRS and do an alternative contribution or ASRS?
that's, totally out of my purview.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. I don't think they can rejoin PSPRS themselves, but I think the agency may be on the hook to pay a small alternate contribution rate to PSPRS, since that position technically should be filled by someone fully invested in PSPRS.
Okay. If you were to make a change to allow them back in, they'd have to come in at a new tier and not the old tier, because that's where we were out of balance. And we finally have rectified that. But if you open that back up, it's just like extending the drop, which causes problems.
But we have the teacher system as a model.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
See, it wasn't
I don't
bad.
think I made anyone angry.
No, this time.
Painless.
It ended well. And the last part talks about school safety, a registry list, and public awareness campaigns. When, let's say we get to this point that Matt just talked about and we had the discussion about, if we could drive folks to these positions, we know that we have the vacancies. We know we have vacancies under SROs, and maybe we get to the retiree where we can allow that. For our school counselors, our social workers, representative, if we get to the point of the school psychologists, to make sure that they understand how rewarding these jobs are, what the opportunities are, and how they exist. And really the registry talks about ensuring, because there are so many vendors out there, that we have reputable vendors that we have vetted, that we feel comfortable directing schools to, a product that we feel comfortable about, to at least entertain relationships with those different vendors. And then building on what we already know. Senator Alston has talked about Franklin. I've had the opportunity to tour Franklin. We have a number of cadets that are at the Phoenix Police Department that have attended or are attending Franklin to build upon that model. What the superintendent unveiled 2 weeks ago, our Arizona Education Economic Commission, looking at career technical education, that not everybody is built to go to 2-year, 4-year or more school, but there are these incredible service opportunities within our state, and making sure that these youth know that those opportunities exist. So it's really coalescing around that, how we drive folks to these very rewarding jobs. And then last is talking about upcoming meetings. If the direction from the task force today is that there's more work to do, what we will do is we will reconvene the working groups at least one more time. We come together as a group, we refine those recommendations, and then we then ultimately bring those back to the task force for a final decision that we can put into our report and that the superintendent can release. That's all I have, sir.
Anybody else wish to say anything? This is your chance.
Anybody from any of the working groups, something that, remember, it was just meant to be high level that I missed that you would like for the benefit of everybody else to hear? Anything else that you would like to add?
A clarified question on the law enforcement retirement system. Is there a waiting period where they could come back into the retirement system, or is it when you're out, unless you're a chief, you cannot get back in?
My understanding, you cannot come back in.
Because
You
with
can-
ASRS, it's a 1-year time, and then when
My-
you come back, you're still drawing your pension, but
At all.
the districts.
Yeah.
employer-
My understanding is,
Yeah, no, you cannot. I mean, I've gone down that whole, and I don't like to take no for an answer. And I've been emphatically told, absolutely not. And I see Mayor Nichols shaking his head yes in agreement. So we need a legislative change. I think a narrow one that would be incredibly helpful in allowing retirees to come back in a capacity.
and I don't think specifically we need to go after allowing them to come back into PSPRS. I don't think, because I
No,
think, to your
yeah.
point, Mayor, that's a disaster waiting to
Yes.
happen.
Yes.
So I'm not advocating that. I don't think retirees want that either. They just want to come back to work, but they can't. Even if they say I'll
Right.
forgo, any kind of new contributions, they just are not allowed to. So I think if we allow them either to go to ASRS, coppers, or just not even go into any pension system and just be an employee and get paid, I think they'd be happy with that.
So perhaps another option would be a third party. So for that 1 year with ASRS retirees who aren't ready to retire, for that 1 year waiting period, districts will often contract with a company like ESI, formerly Smart Schools used to be a provider. For that year, district pays the contractor pays the employee, and then after the year, they return to the district. So there's some options that, I'm familiar with the ASRS system, I'm happy to.
You don't need to go back to the system. You continue getting the pension. that
You still
got.
continue to get your pension, yes.
right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm doing.
We just want,
um,
yeah.
I'm getting my pension. I'm not contributing. I haven't entered back into the system, but I continue to get my pension.
And I think that would satisfy the needs of almost every retiree. When I talk to them, they just want to come back and work, but they can't.
And nobody wants to give up their pension.
No one's doing that.
Yeah.
No one wants to work in the school that bad.
Karen, you look like you want to
Yeah,
say something.
so I do think we should have another meeting or two. And one of the things I would like to drill down on is how we can create a program to bring more police officers onto the force. And so talking about filling that 2-year gap between high school and when they can actually enter the academy, what's something that we can offer that will put kids into it and then have them be ready for into the academy, and just have more incentives to become police officers and make police officers be remove the stigma around why we're not getting police officers just because of the things that have happened over the last several years, because we need them. And so I'd really like to take a focus on how we can grow it at the front end so that ultimately we can have the seasoned police officers move into the SRO department. That's what we choose.
And if I could, that's a huge push right now. Actually, the Lapson Corporation, I worked with them for the last 2 years on the program. They're actually hosting a 2-day conference in November. I can send Mike the info
Okay.
if you would send it to the group. It's all on that, on the pipeline.
Yep.
Pipeline to law enforcement.
Yep.
And what we spent 2 years going around the country and identifying really good programs. And then
That's great.
highlighting those. So that conference is gonna be bringing people together to highlight the programs they're using. Franklin, I nominated Franklin for that. There's a couple other small programs around the valley that I highlighted that are gonna talk about how they're doing that, again, to change the perception. Unfortunately, we're dealing with the media, social media, and it's really hard to overcome right now. Most young men and women, when you talk to them, they just they don't want to be on the news. They don't want something bad to happen and be on the front page of the news next year, have the news at their door. So we're trying to overcome that because it really is a great job. It's a great profession. And we just need more young men and women who want to join.
Absolutely, and as a mom, when, I remember when my kids were in kindergarten and we give a little list to them about whatever they must be when they grow up, and I think police officer, firefighters is always the top of the list, the most amount, and we have to bring that back to where that's what people, what, young boys and girls want to be.
So, Matt, it sounds like what you're saying is we need to get on the media and tell them to stop attacking police officers.
If it was only so easy.
Yeah.
But, in our career technical education, we're trying to encourage students to go on a path to either public safety, teachers, places where we have those shortages. Problem with a police officer is they can't be police officers until they're 21, they graduate when they're 18, but there are transition things they can do. They can work as guards at prisons, they can work in non-police officer jobs in police departments. So that's the sort of thing, we're going to do a big push to try to channel people into those areas that are badly needed.
Yeah, we were all doing that. When I worked for the county, we did a lot of push on that. When I would joke, because I'd go with Jerry Williams and Frank Milstead to talk about our 3 agencies. And it was really funny because I'm the only one that can say, hey, 18-year-olds, I got a job for you today. Come on down, and then detention officer, and then we'll transition you at 21 into, a peace officer. That's what you want. So yeah, there are a lot of opportunities out there, and the career and technical institutes are phenomenal partners to us. But again, sometimes I think someone talked about those bad decisions young men and women make by the time they graduate high school until they're 21, sometimes unfortunately prohibit them from being peace officers. So again, educating them on the do's and don'ts is really important as well.
Councilman?
I also learned recently that in Arizona, you must be full-time to be a peace officer. So we just had an officer who left her position because looking to see if anybody nods their head as in no.
Full-time as in,
Like you can't work part-time.
that's not true.
That's not.
It's not true. It's not
at
true
this
from a
state level.
certification, at a certification standpoint. Employment, we don't get involved in employment.
Right.
So our direction to agencies is, because it happens all the time with the reserves, they'll call and ask, hey, I want to make this person a reserve. How many hours do they have to work? And we said, we don't care. As long as they're fully certified, and we appoint them, we audit their new hire background process. And then they shoot annually, they do their continuing training hours, and they do their decision-making. As long as they do all of that, we don't care how many hours they work.
So from a certification problem.
They can still be
It's-
certified.
be
Now, the
certified.
agency might have
So
employment
it could be
issues.
agency level, not legislative level.
It
So, okay.
Definitely got to be the agency level. It's not at the state, it's not at the state level, and not at a certification level.
Thank
We
you.
get that question a lot.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's the problem, because you need 2 people if you only have one part, if you have a part-time person.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Annette Wright, and I'm with the Arizona School Counseling Association, but also I'm in the works working with kids on the ground and at Holmes Elementary in Mesa. And I just want to make a comment about the police officer. You guys are talking about building that back up. And we have a police officer that comes to our school and just checks in, and his name's Officer Palmer. And he'll just come and check in, and the kids absolutely love it. And they look up to him, like building those relationships with, oh, I want to be one when I grow up, But then he's an older gentleman, and I think he's retired, and everybody's like, where's Officer Palmer? Because he used to come in the lunchroom and hand out stickers and eat lunch with the kids. And so it's like, oh, let me call him, I'll see if he can come by. But then they retire, and the kids are like, where's Officer Palmer? And then, another one will come in, but then we've got to build the relationships again. So just a comment on the retired police officers coming back. The kids absolutely love it.
No,
And it gives them a but they look up to them and thinking about their job. I want to be you when I grow up.
It's wonderful.
Just a comment about that.
I need you to come with me when I talk to the press.
Thank you for sharing that. Representative?
Thank you. And I'm very, I mean, this is such a large issue to handle. There are so many facets to it when you're talking about our school districts and, over 1 million kids and tens of thousands of employees and all of these, the physical infrastructure and, who's coming and who's going. And of course, school safety is one of the top concerns that we're seeing in voter data, that parents are really concerned that their kids are not going to be safe at school. So being able to wrap your arms around this, I think, is really, really well done. I did want to shift to the counselor and the mental health aspect of this. And we had talked in our working group about the need for, because not only do we have vacancies with police officers and SROs, but we have vacancies on the school counselor and social work side. And I know we've sought to augment that by potentially adding psychologists to it. But I brought up the idea of telehealth used in certain circumstances where we could leverage the expertise outside of this state. I know schools right now are doing that for teachers. There was a really phenomenal article about Prescott. Wasn't able to offer Spanish for 3 years, couldn't hire a Spanish teacher, but they leveraged distance learning, and now they have a teacher who lives in North Carolina that is teaching Spanish to these students with a proctor who's monitoring the classroom. So I think it's worth exploring a possibility of providing flexibility on the telehealth side. It's not going to work for everybody. It's not going to be a surefire way to provide that more intensive mental health supports that the schools can't provide. But I wonder if that's a way that we can get help faster to certain kids who could benefit from it. And then the other item is around peace officer training. And I was really excited to see, looking at the certification requirements. I've heard from parents around, making sure that there is good training for SROs to interact with students with special needs. And that is a very different plane that some may not be as familiar with. One parent talked about a school safety drill, where a self-contained classroom with students with some more severe disabilities were traumatized by this school safety drill that didn't have to be that way. And so figuring out how to accommodate the needs of these children will be really good. And I'm glad to see that that's something that you're considering.
And I can address part of that. There's a separate working group that I'm on outside of this body because of change to the legislation around school safety plans addressing students with access and functional needs. Ensuring that the school safety plans reflect that, in that it's burned into those plans so that we, as soon as possible, not traumatize those children. Recognize that when we're drilling, there's some children that don't have the ability to evacuate an area on their own. I went out to Lawrence Institute for Education Life out in Gilbert, where you have several hundred kids that would fit into that realm, and to learn from the way they do it and then take that back to our working group to make sure that we can properly inform the schools going forward. Just a little part of that, Representative.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Stacey Anderson with the Arizona Association of School Psychologists. Thank you for inviting us to the table today. One of the things that we have mentioned, we were a part of the smaller task groups. Initially, we did a meeting with the staffing piece that really focused a lot on the training. A couple things that we just wanted to mention as well, because we are definitely a proponent of team effort and using multidisciplinary roles within schools. So with our, and we've mentioned before, even with our SROs and the collaboration that we seek and utilize in schools is very beneficial when they are trained to work in school teams and what that looks like on school campuses. Same should this other piece come into fruition with SSOs. It would be very important for our schools to be able to work with them on teams and wraparound services for children. We don't just do it for children, we do it for staff as well as looking at whole communities and how to partner regarding evidence-based practices, highly research type of programs, curriculums, and so forth. And how do we actually look at the fidelity of that? The other piece of it, as we are very focused on the staffing today, and some of the other pieces, is really to be aware and a recommendation from our organizations definitely to continue a few more sessions of these work groups, because we would be remiss if we did not talk about prevention. Every role is extremely critically important in schools. SROs are needed, and we recognize that as team members. And yet, everything looks great on paper, but it's always the follow through on what you do and what is best practice. And the more we empower the community, students and staff in the preventive piece of what to do, how to engage, how to prevent, what to look for, because school safety is far greater than some of the pieces and topics that we talked about today. And so, again, as this whole group looking at state safety for children and youth, it would be remiss for us to not look at the framework in which we are implementing all of these things in the most effective and beneficial way to ensure safety of children and groups. So, as school psychologists, we just need to mention those pieces so that we keep that in the forefront as well.
Thank you, Stacy. Any other comments?
Real quickly, just to kind of piggyback off what Stacey said, I'm Asia Tizeo, and I also represent the Arizona School Counselors Association. One of the things that I know that we see in our field as well is a lot of counselors being pulled away from their actual counseling duties to do non-counseling duties. There's no current mandate in Arizona for exactly what our counselors should be doing. So maybe I'd like to see our training group also meet again and maybe explore how that could help alleviate some of the issues that our students are facing, because our school counselors, our psychologists, if they're being pulled away to, do things that non-certified or, less certified individuals can do, that really frees us up to be with the kids where we need to be. So I agree, we should absolutely have another meeting or two with our individual task forces.
Thank you, Asia.
And I would also like to piggyback on that as far as, educating like preventative point from even at an elementary school, even at a preschool, prevention, like teaching coping skills is huge for our kids, coping strategies, but also what I'm seeing at my elementary school is we need parent education for this too, because I can only do so much when a student says he wants to hurt himself or herself or someone else. Because of their age, the parent or guardian has to take over then and see that they get the help they need, and that's not happening. So we can have so much, voice for the students, but we need a parent education.
Wendy Miller with Challenge Charter School, representing charter schools and administrators, and I agree that the prevention piece is critical. And so again, I thank the department for a high focus on character education and citizenship, because I believe that is a core element of it. So I know there's a lot of concurrent work to what we're doing that's happening on that front as well. I'd like to thank the people that have been doing the heavy lifting. I was so excited to see the OMD announcement and to know that change was already coming from the time and the commitment and the work here. I would like to concur, Representative Gress, that sometimes I struggle with economies of scale often, and so we have used remote resources if we could not find, so person-to-person interaction cannot be replaced. So as an educator, I believe in that passionately. But I also have seen situations on my own campus where I could not have complied with state law, the certification for my special education teacher. I could not find someone. I have been trying with everything. And so we were able to secure that resource in a remote and then have a proctor, a highly qualified proctor in the room. We've also delivered our music instruction that way. Music is a kind of a specialty. It's hard to find, a good music teacher. And the experience that our students had with that was very empowering because these teachers were coming in from all over the country. So the students weren't just learning about music. They were learning about the region that this teacher was in and getting that additional, excitement in the classroom. So I do think that's a solution that should be allowable in this conversation for unique circumstances because a resource is better than no resource, regardless of, you have to work it a little bit different. Thank you. Oh, and I agree, we should spend more time. This is so important. I'm absolutely committed to giving more time and continuing to work with this exceptional group.
Thank you, Wendy. Anything else for the good of the order? It's very clear. We're going to get back together as our working groups. So as Bobby, Melissa, and I start working on those times, we'll push that out and work to accommodate schedules to the extent that we can. So we have more work to do. Yes, Senator.
Matt, maybe you could take the lead, but if you can get us some details as to what in statute prohibits people coming back.
I'll have to find someone smarter than myself, but I can do that.
We're looking at prospective legislation right now. I think Representative Gress only has 48 bills planned. I'm sure he could use a 49.
A very
I
important
get
one.
paid by the bill, so. So, gotta spike my pension.
Well, Melissa's back there. She'll get the information and give it to you.
Probably knows it off the top of her head. So.
He does.
Thank you. Sir, is there anything you want to say in closing?
No, I just want to thank everybody. The participation here has been much more than anticipated. Everyone has been very committed, very enthusiastic, and it shows what a big issue school safety is in our state. And we're very grateful for your participation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.